Welcome to Lesson 2 of Beginner Crochet. In this lesson, we'll be learning the parts of the chain, what's known as the double crochet stitch in the UK, or single crochet in the US. It's the same stitch, but the UK and the US have different terminology. We'll also learn the slip stitch, how to avoid common mistakes, and have a brief look at the effects of tension. I'll go more in depth about tension in Lesson 3, so please be sure to watch it. At the end, there will be a small practice swatch for these stitches, which includes how to read a pattern. Our stitches will be made into the chain, so let's take a closer look before we begin. Okay, so this should be 10 chains. I'll just count them to be sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Remember, the loop on the hook isn't counted. At the back of the chain, these are called bumps. I'll turn the chain back over to take a look at the front. Stitches can be made into the bottom of the V shape here. The hook would go under the bump, putting 2 strands over the hook. We can also work in the top of the V, here, which puts 1 strand over the hook. I recommend working in this loop as it's easier for beginners. Stitches are worked into the chain from right to left. Okay, so the first step is to make our 10 chains. Hold the slip knot, yarn over, and pull through the loop on the hook to make 1 chain. Continue making chains until there are 10. Remember to keep some slack in your yarn, and to hold the chain just below the hook as you pull through. This will help stop the chains from getting too tight. I cover making the chain in Lesson 1, so please check that out for a detailed tutorial. 10 chains made. Remember the loop on the hook isn't counted. We need 1 more chain to account for the height of the stitch. So we skip the height chain and work into the second chain. Push your hook into the chain. There is 1 strand of the chain plus the loop on the hook. Yarn over, and pull your hook back through. There are 2 loops on the hook. Make sure the loops are even. Use your index finger to help control your tension. Yarn over, pull through both loops, leaving 1 loop on the hook. Our first stitch is made. Push the hook into the next chain, yarn over, and bring the hook back through. There are 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over, and pull through both loops, leaving 1 loop on the hook. Our second stitch is done. Push the hook into the next chain, yarn over, and bring the hook back through. There are 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over, and pull through both loops, leaving 1 loop on the hook. So that's basically how to make a double crochet stitch. Just make sure you're going under the top loop of the chain, that there are 2 loops on the hook when you bring the hook back through, and 1 loop left on the hook after you've closed the stitch. We now have 5 stitches. If you make a mistake, just remove your hook and pull on the yarn to undo the stitches you're unhappy with. Put your hook back into the loop and continue crocheting. As I make the stitches, I keep the middle finger of my hook hand on the loops to help position them. As you work, remember to have slack coming from the ball and that your loops are even before closing the stitch. Okay, almost finished 10 stitches. Now for the last stitch, in the last chain. So the first row is finished. It's super important to always count your stitches to avoid uneven work. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, now for row 2. Make 1 chain for the stitch height. This is called the turning chain. Now flip the end like you're turning a page. From now on, we'll be working in these gaps between the stitches of the previous row. The top of the stitches form these V's. Push the hook into the first gap. There are 2 strands from the stitch, plus the loop on the hook. Yarn over. Bring the hook back through so it sits parallel with the first row. Yarn over. Pull through both loops, leaving 1 loop on the hook. And there's the first stitch of row 2. Push the hook into the next gap. There are 2 strands from the stitch. Yarn over and pull your hook back through. Yarn over. Pull through both loops. Carry on making stitches into each gap. Tension refers to your stitch height and how tight or loose you crochet. Things to improve your tension include having enough slack from the yarn ball, using your index finger to control the slack, and the middle finger of your hook hand to help keep a steady hold on your loops. Bringing your hook parallel to the row below when you bring the yarn back through the stitch. The last gap is between the stitch and the turning chain. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to see and to push the hook through. And that's our second row finish. Remember to count your stitches before starting the next row. Once again, we'll have a turning chain of 1 for the height and turn our work. Make a stitch in the first gap and continue along the row. I'll crochet a few more rows, then show you how to weave the ends in. Okay, to tie off your work, cut your yarn, leaving a good 3 to 4 inches to weave in. Yarn over and pull the end all the way through the loop on the hook to make a knot. Gently tighten the knot by pulling on the yarn. Thread your darning needle and we'll start weaving the end in. Push the needle through the fibres of your stitches. I usually go through at least 3 stitches. Pull the yarn, but not too tight as you don't want to pull the actual stitches. You can just loosen the yarn if you do. Pass the needle back through, but go through different fibres to the last time. Go through one last time to be sure the end is secure. Cut the yarn close to the stitches, and we are all done. And there we are. I have 10 rows of 10 UK double crochet stitches, which is shortened to DC, or in US terms, a single crochet stitch, which is shortened to SC. Push the hook into the stitch. There are the stitch V's plus the loop on the hook. Yarn over and bring the loop back through the stitch and straight through the loop on the hook. That's 1 slip stitch. Push the hook into the next stitch. Yarn over, pull the loop through the stitch and the loop on the hook. You have to be careful to make the slip stitch the same width as the stitch. If it's shorter, then the work will pucker up. And there's 3 slip stitches. The V of the slip stitches sit lower and slightly more forward than these other V's. The edges of your work should be straight on all sides. If they aren't, you may be making one of these common mistakes. This is what a twisted chain looks like. You can see a little bump here, and the bottom of the chain also changes. If I turn it over, you can see the bottom of the chain also looks off. This can happen when you work into the back of the chain instead of the front, like this. You can see my second to last stitch doesn't look great. To fix it, undo or frog the affected stitches. Redo them, making sure you work in the front of the chain. Uneven edges can be caused by skipping the first or last stitch. The row below should have 2 legs forming a triangle. Here, there is 1 leg missing. Plus, I only have 9 stitches instead of 10. This happens when you work in the second gap instead of the first. I'll do a quick stitch to show you. You can see the missing stitch here. One way to avoid this mistake is by putting a stitch marker in your first and last stitches, so it's easier to see where they are. A common mistake is to place the first stitch into the turning chain instead of the first gap. I'll give you another quick demo. This adds stitches, causing the sides to flare out. Again, using a stitch marker can help to avoid this mistake. So those are the most common mistakes made with crochet stitches. As tension plays a huge role in how your crochet turns out, it's important to develop good tension habits from the start to avoid your work looking like these examples. Patterns will have a page with all the necessary information on it, like which materials you need and the gauge. If there is a notes section, it's important to read it as it often contains need-to-know information. The pattern calls for a 4mm hook and uses an acrylic double knit yarn. It will use about 4 grams of yarn. The swatch is nearly 3.5 inches in height and 4 inches in width. The gauge is 5 rows by 4 stitches per inch, as you can see here. We'll talk more about gauge in the next lesson. There should also be a stitch and abbreviation page to make sure you understand which stitches to use and the abbreviations used in the pattern. Some designers will include both UK and US terms in their pattern. I'll be using UK terms for this tutorial, but I'll make a note of the US terms too. Patterns can include written, photo and chart instructions, or any combination of these instruction types. We'll be following along with all 3 of these today. Written and photo instructions are self-explanatory. They usually have a key with the abbreviations, and the instructions are split into rows. Chart instructions use symbols to represent a stitch. The stitch count is along the bottom and top. The row count is up the sides. Charts are read from right to left for 1 row, then left to right for the next, alternating as you move up. These chains on the side represent the turning chain. Okay, so this is the swatch we'll be making. It has 14 rows and 14 stitches. Here is the chart symbol and stitch name in both UK and US terms, along with the abbreviation. It's a good idea to familiarise yourself with the terminology used in a pattern. A DC is a single crochet in US terms. Both the written and photo instructions state chain 15 and make a DC in the second chain from the hook. Remember, the loop on the hook isn't counted. This tells us that there is a turning chain of 1 and there should be 14 stitches. This is clearer to see on the chart. Okay, so let's start crocheting. First, make the 15 chains. Keep hold of your chains under the hook and keep an eye on your slack coming from the ball of yarn. You can see my progress on the chart. So that's 14 chains and now 1 for turning. We skip this chain and work into the second chain. That's our first stitch. Now just carry on making stitches into each chain. If you look at the chart, you can see how each stitch correlates to a chain. I'll leave you to finish row 1 and I'll be back for row 2. Row 1 is finished. Remember to count your stitches if you didn't already. Let's do row 2. Chain 1 and turn. Work into the first stitch and carry on along the row, making a DC in each stitch. Keep an eye on your tension by checking your yarn and that your loops are even before closing the stitch. I'll leave you to finish the rest of the swatch. If you're following the chart, row 3 starts on the right and is worked to the left. Row 4 starts on the left and is worked to the right. Row 5 begins on the right and is worked to the left. Keep alternating as you move up the rows. I'll leave the pattern up here and a link below if you want a copy of it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in lesson 3, where we go more in depth about gauge.